Thank you. It's lovely to follow that last talk because I think that what I'm wanting to present to you is a language of inquiry, a way that we can inquire into our own and one another's experience in a completely different way to any that I experienced growing up. What I'm going to do with this talk is I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about my background and why this was so important to me. A little bit about David Grove, who originated Clean Questions. This is not my tool. What I've done with it is my work, but it's shareware. That man gave it away. He said, take it, do what you want with it. And we did, and I'm going to offer the same thing to you at the end of this. I'll talk a little bit about a couple of case studies, and one of them, really interestingly, being here at Liverpool John Moores, there's been a big project here at Liverpool John Moores University using Clean Questions, using metaphors, so I'll talk to you about that. And then we'll end up with what would you like to have happen. So, tiny bit about my background. I am American by nationality, but I've got a British father and I was born in Africa. And so what that meant was that by the time I was 9 years old, I'd been born in Africa, I'd gone over to Newcastle, I'd lived in Newcastle for a bit where it was very cold and grey, and I'd moved to California, and I lived there for a bit. And by the time you've lived in 3 continents, one of the things that you work out very quickly is that rules aren't true. When you move into a new society, they are governed by a whole load of rules about the way that we do things around here. And you learn them, and then you do those things, and they affect the way you think, what you do, what you speak, who you hang out with, who you talk to. And then you go somewhere new, and it all changes. So when at the age of 9, I find myself in California being told that I can't be friends with Tui, who's the only kid I've connected with so far because he's black, I go, but that's not true. That's just a set of rules you made up. We could just make up some new rules, and then that doesn't matter anymore. But you can't, because when you're in that society, those rules are true. They're embedded so deeply that they're not easily challengeable, and certainly not by a very earnest 9-year-old. So I set off on a bit of a quest, which was what was some way, some tool I could get that would allow me to see my own rules, help other people see theirs, in a non-judgmental way that would make us go, hey, hang on, which of these are working, what's not working, what would we like to have happen next? So I went to study anthropology, linguistics at the School of Oriental and African Studies. But while I was doing that, there was a man in New Zealand called David Grove. And now David himself, he's got a Maori mother and a British father, and he was raised in the Salvation Army. He was raised to serve. Now, David had been studying reflective psychotherapists. He was looking at people like Virginia Satir, Milton Erickson, Carl Rogers, and he was studying their transcripts. These were people who were supposed to be listening to other people, were listening to other people. They were very, very brilliant psychotherapists, and reflecting back their experience so that the person built up a sense of themselves without the psychotherapist interfering. What David looked at was he said, you know, if you look at the patterns in their transcripts, you can still see how they start to shape their questions based on their patterns, their rules, their ideas. And if you look over a series of these, you can get the feel for the internal patterns of the psychotherapist that are not to do with the person they're talking to, but are to do with them. And he said, what if we only asked questions that had no content in them? What if we only asked questions like, about location, about attribute, about what happens next? So what kind of a thing is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where does it come from? What happens next? It's like what? What if that's all you did? Then what happens to the people that you're working with? So that was his quest. His job was looking with people who got things like who'd had child sexual abuse. He worked a lot with Vietnam vets, people who had experiences that were too difficult in many ways for them to just express. And what David would do is he would help to build a landscape around their systems. I won't tell you about it. I'll tell you a story. It's easier to do it like that. So he'd been developing this for 15 years. I was on my little quest, and some people who knew me and knew him said, you must go and see this man. He's unbelievably good. So I went along. I'd just come back from Ghana. I was doing a PhD in artificial intelligence. I was doing a lot of computer programming at the time. I came in. He was working on the stage. And a client had come up. He'd said, anyone want to come and work with me? Somebody said yes. He said, what would you like to have happen? I'll let you see what he said. He said, what would you like to have happen? She said, oh, whenever I'm public speaking, I just lose my voice. And he said, and you just lose your voice. And when you lose your voice, what kind of lose? She said, disappears. And it disappears. And as it disappears, where is the disappears of that voice? She said, it goes in a hole. And is there anything else about that hole? It's got my father. And it's got my father. And when that hole has got my father, is there anything else? She said, I'm stuck. And she started, you can see, whatever the public speaking thing is that she had, she says, I'm stuck. And he said, and you're stuck. And what kind of eye is that eye that's stuck like that? She said, I'm holding my breath. And I'm holding my breath. And is there anything else about that breath? And as I watched him work, and she was just there on stage, and I saw the physiology of the symptom. And what he did, slowly and surely, with clean questions, is he built the landscape around the symptom, which induces metaphors. So, and I was thinking about well, both the wings that we've just watched and the rites of passage, was that one thing is expressed in terms of another. So with that girl, woman, she was in her 40s, what she got was that as a child, she had walked into a room and watched her father shoot himself. And having internalized that and not having had the community to grieve, to share, to let that go, that had taken up residence in her psyche space, that simply every time she went out somewhere, she did what she did, especially when there was something big and important to do, she did what she did in that moment, which was to hold her breath, to stop time. And so as I watched him work, I thought, this is phenomenal. What I'm really enjoying here is he takes what's negative, like a symptom, but when it's in the right context, when you see how and why and where it comes from, particularly the metaphor landscape, it gives up it confesses its strengths. You get to see how it works. And I watched her on stage reintegrate the power and the will of a little girl who didn't manage to stop time. But still, to hold that power and that will in the body, to watch that get reabsorbed. And then off she went, and I sat there at the back thinking, that was phenomenal. But, it's psychotherapy. It's not what I do. It's not what I'm interested in. But that was, whoa. I don't know what that guy does, but that's phenomenal. And then he said, OK, let's go and do an exercise. Here's the exercise. You've got 4 questions. Go and find somebody in the audience and ask them, what would you like to have happen? Is there anything else? Where? And that, and what kind of? So OK, and I looked around, and there was some really dull man over here. And I was like, oh, please not me, please not me, please not me. And he came straight over. I was like, oh, OK. And I looked at somebody else. I said, I did it with him first. What would you like to have happen? And he said some stuff. And I said, what kind of thing is that thing? And he said some stuff. And I said, where is it? And he said some stuff. And I said, is there anything else? And it was actually pretty good. And he was kind of, I felt a bit awkward. There was a bit weird questions, but it was all right. And then he turned to me and he said, what would you like to have happen? And I said, I'd like to find my path. And he said, what kind of path is that? I said, one that I absolutely know I have to follow. And he said, and where is that path? And I went, it's there. And he said, and is there anything else about that path that's there? And I said, it's not where I'm going. And then that was the end of it. Everyone went home. I went to the bar and I went, oh my goodness. A man I don't like, that I didn't want to talk to, with 4 clean questions, has got me more information about why I'm generally depressed and unhappy and miserable and drinking too much. It's because I'm doing a degree in artificial intelligence. I spent all my time in front of screens with a partner I don't even love anymore and haven't done for years, and I need to be over here. Now, if he can do that in 4 questions, I can teach anyone to do this. That completely changed my life. And I sat in the bar, and I didn't have a drink. I sat there with a glass of water, and a week later, I'd left my partner of 12 years. I'd left my PhD. I made a lot of people very unhappy with my move, and I went and I turned up at his doorstep, and I said, you need to teach me what you're doing. I need to understand how to do this, because I think with a tool like this, you could change the world. So I had to get a job, because I've clearly lost my ESRC grant, and I got a job with the Home Office. I was already a youth worker. One of the ways I paid my way through university was I ran as a street youth worker in King's Cross. And so I went and got a job with the Home Office, 10 of the worst kids in the worst school in Hackney. And I thought, okay, so this is this tool. What I'm going to do, there are rules to the tool. Whatever they say, you accept and build a question relating to it. You have no outcome. You do not decide what they do and don't want to do. You do not decide what's good for them. So I've got these 10 of the worst kids in the worst schools in Hackney. They're outside of the school system. They're young criminals. And what I decided to do was to break the rules. I was supposed to do baseline assessments and give them individual learning packages and everything like that. I didn't. I got them together in a group and I said, what would you like to have happen? And they said lots of different things. One of the main things that most of them wanted to have happen was they said, I keep losing my temper. I said, and you keep losing your temper. And when you keep losing your temper's like what? And you can answer this. I'm not used to presenting. I'm much more used to facilitating. I'd really like you all down here doing this. So while I'm asking the kids the questions, you can just answer them for yourselves. So say, when you're losing your temper, that's like what? I go red. And you go red. And when you go red, what kind of red? Blood red. So you go blood red. Who's not like that? I switch. And you switch. So anything else about that switch? Yeah, it's really quick. Walking down the street, next thing I know, someone's lying down there bleeding. Okay, who's not like that? Oh, me, miss. Well, you're like what? I never get into trouble. You never get into trouble? No, never. Oh, no, he's right, miss. He never gets into trouble. No, he's never fighting. All right. So when you go red, what happens just before you're red? He doesn't speak English very well. He points to a maroon. He says, like that. I said, where's maroon? Where is it? He says, here. He says, okay, and when it's maroon, it's here. With the switch, what happens just before you switch? Oh, I don't know, miss. I'm just walking down the street, and then it's just all over. Okay, who's not like that? Me, miss, I go cold. So all we're doing, very gently, 2 or 3 questions of any one person at any one time, and they start to build up bits of models. With the kid who goes red, I do a couple of rounds. Now, I didn't know then that this was going to be crucial to the processes that we developed later on. But because they were teenagers, I couldn't spend too much time with one person because it would go too deep and the rest would get bored. And these were wild kids. So 2 or 3 questions. With the kid that goes red, so before that, I said, and before it goes maroon, it's like what? He said, it's blue, like the sky, like my mum. I go, okay. And I think the kids are going to take the piss out of them. They never did. And whenever we did this clean modelling stuff, one of the things I noticed was that the kids rarely made fun of each other. It was like a creation of a sacred space. So we do it, they all go home. And I think, oh my goodness, I'm going to get the sack, because I haven't done anything that I was supposed to do. And it's really weird. And what if they go and tell their parents? And I don't even know what I'm doing. But they came back the next Wednesday. It was a voluntary class. And the kid who went red said, do you know what, miss? I've been thinking. That stuff we did, when I get up in the morning, my dad's drunk, red. And I have to pick my clothes up, and they stink of sweat, because my dad hasn't taken them to the laundry, red. And I haven't got enough to eat, and I haven't got any money for the bus. He said, miss, when I get to school, my red's right here. Is that why I hit people? And I said, I don't know, Mangwa, I don't know. He said, well, what I was thinking was, if my red's up here, and I'm going to be late for school anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Clapton Duck Pond, and I'm going to look at the water, and I'm going to breathe in blue, and I'm going to make myself purple, and then I think I can control my temper. I said, okay. And then they all wanted one. So one who switches says, that's not fair, miss, because mine's too fast. You can't do that with mine. I said, okay, well, let's just find out. So when just before you switch, what happens? No, you just walk down the street, miss. Somebody gives you a look, and then it's all over. Aha, and somebody gives you a look. What kind of look is that look? Well, you know, one that just goes straight into you. And whereabouts into you does that look go? And they all got a metaphor. So they all got one metaphor for tempers. But also they started to be able to manage the tempers. The next day, Jamie comes in and says, miss, that stuff you did, can you do it with maths? I said, maths? What do you mean? And he said, big lad. He said, oh, well, you know, when I start trying to think of numbers, miss, they just spin. I said, all right, let's find out. Come on, lads, let's get together. We're going to do maths. Oh, no, listen to me. I'm going to ask you some questions. I don't want to know the answers. I want to know, how do you know? What's 2 and 3? Oh, it's 5, miss. What kind of 5 is that? Well, it just comes out, miss. Who doesn't do that? Me, miss. What do you do? Well, it's like 2 plus 3 and then 5. It's like I can see it in chalk on a blackboard. I said, all right, it's not like that. And we started to model. But by the time we'd done temper, maths, spelling, then we did what do you like when you're at your best? What do you like when you're learning at your best? Something phenomenal started to happen. They learnt the questions as fast. They took past me and their ability to self-model. So then they'd start to say things like, you got to slow down, miss. Keep the time up. You got to slow down, miss, because you're talking too fast. I'm from Newcastle. You know, I do talk fast. And I said, well, what do you care, Mary Lou? You're Nigerian. She talks so fast. She's like, so what do you care? She said, yeah, but miss, it's not for me, it's for Naomi. Do you remember what she said? When she's learning at her best, it's like an idea has to come into a pond, and then like all the ripples have to go flat again before the next idea comes. Well, miss, you're just chucking stones at her. And I go, okay, so let me just check. Within what must have been about 6 sessions, you're going to teach me how to teach you. Now what have we got? So, I didn't know what to do with it. We won community safety awards. The kids went back to school. But nobody would listen to what it was that we were trying to do with them. They'd say, here's some more bad kids. Do that magic again. And I said, well, no. Learn how to do it, because it's not difficult. And they say, well, how do you control them like that? I said, I don't. I give them the ability to reflect on themselves in a non-judgmental way, and so that somehow they start to become peer coaches. I don't really know. But it's a kind of magic. And so I've spent 15 years with my head down, trying it here, trying it there. And then Liverpool John Moores has been one of the first big comprehensive times that we've had to really test it out. So what they did here, is that me they're doing that? What they do here is that they get the students together and they've developed some workbooks. They took some heroes in the sports development world. So, you know, Beth Tweddle and Kate Walsh, who are real fantastic elite athletes. And they use the clean questions to model them. So Beth, when you're at your best, you're like what? And then they use some clean questions to work that out. Or they'll say, Kate Walsh, what's a time when you've really had something terrible happen and you'll be able to pick yourself up and go forward again? And she'll think about it for a bit and say, so when it was like that, that's like what? And they develop metaphor models for each of these, for 7 themes for each of the, well, 6, those themes there, for these heroes. But then the students, every other month, they develop those for themselves. And the thing about those models is when you develop one, you kind of get to know yourself and you can understand somebody else. When you develop 2, that becomes quite a kind of interesting. This was a bit like that. When you've got 3, then you start to develop a pattern, an understanding of yourself and of the other group members that is a completely different level. And when you get 6, you become what I call now a self-learning system, where you start to be able to predict what one another would do, what you're likely to do in any given situation, and then foresee things, and then create stuff together that you had no idea that was going to be possible. So, those are the themes that they learnt. Yeah. So, with clean questions, one of the things that you can do with them is anything. You can inquire into death. So when somebody has died, you can use them to help you express. So right now, this is like what? And you can use them to express your grief. We can use them. I use them a lot with birthing. I had 3. I was very, very, very lucky. I had 3 births at home. One of the ways that I managed that was to explain very, very clearly with clean questions. I used clean questions to work out what people wanted to do to me, then I could say yes or no to it, but also to develop a real sense of the kind of birth I wanted and to maintain my boundaries around it. They're used at the moment with multinationals. I've got a project on at the moment where they're trying to work with economists, philosophers, and sociologists to say, if we were going to remodel the way that we do business so that we didn't destroy the world, that would be like what? And they're taking the different themes that they think are involved in that. and developing them together. So the questions are very, very simple. They're really easy to learn. They're very tricky to apply because it means giving up being yourself and giving up everything you normally do, but they're very, very effective. And it's shareware. Lots of people are doing it. David gave it away. If you can think of new things to do with it and new places to apply it, then that'll be yours. That'll be your new field. So I really encourage you to go and do some searching around if you like the idea of them and think, what would you like to do with such a tool? And that's us. Thank you.